Jeff, if you wouldn't mind starting out telling us a little bit about the mission of International Christian Concern.
Yeah, well, ICC or persecution.org, we have kind of three purposes, and we work for the persecuted church. We serve them around the globe. Three functions: advocacy, awareness, and assistance. Not in that order, but assistance. We are taking care of pastors when they're attacked. If they're murdered, we get their family to a new place in life. We're pushing the gospel out at the toughest places in the world where missionaries don't work. We work on Capitol Hill, so we work with members, we work with the State Department, educating and talking to them about what's happening overseas. And then work like this, just getting the word out, awareness, just making the church aware, as well as the secular media, trying to get them to pay attention to persecution.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the ground, you're providing information, you're really doing everything when it comes to this issue. And this is a massive issue. You have a new report out, the 2023 Persecutors of the Year report. And one of the things that stands out to me, the general fact that you have 200 to 300 million, that's the estimate, Christians around the world who are being persecuted. When you see those figures, I mean, you're familiar with the work, you do the work, but I mean, that is a monumental number. What goes through your heart and your mind as you ponder that massive number of people?
Well, I've been doing this for 20 some years, and that's, a number that's bigger than the populace of Christians in the United States. So just to give people perspective, and, a lot of times people want to argue that number, Billy. They could say, maybe it's not that high. And what I would say is, look, you can argue the margin. You can't argue the core of it. And just look at China. You've got 120, 150 million Christians. Look at Nigeria, North Korea. Just start adding them up. So it's very clear that number, whatever it is, we give a range, is pretty accurate. And it ranges from light to the absolute decimation of the church, which is the murder and assassination and torture. But even so, one of the big points I like to make is that, look, what we see the dictators doing overseas to strangle Christianity is the beginning of what we're seeing here in the West. So this is persecution light, nothing heavy. We deal with heavy stuff. But you see the job discrimination, that exclusion from the public square, the silencing, the firing, the court cases. All that stuff is persecution light that goes on overseas that's used to strangle the church, what we're seeing here.
Well, that's a big question, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, Christians in America have nothing to complain about because the persecution that Christians complain about is nothing like what people face in Nigeria or North Korea or China or many other places around the world. But you just raised an interesting point, and I'd love to just focus on that a little bit more for a moment, because all of that deeper persecution around the world, you would imagine it started somewhere else, right? That it didn't start obviously where it is now. When you look at the things you just mentioned right now, and you look at where we are in America, there have been some victories in the courts of late. But do you have any fears or worries about maybe where this country could end up if those things aren't kept in check?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to be too alarmist, but what did the Nazis do when they were attacking the Jews? You soften the populace up, and there's a whole lot of negativity that streamed out in terms of media and pop culture. It was painting the Jews a certain way. And I've watched this for 20 years. And I can't tell you how many reports over the years. I'd say, look, the storm clouds are gathering. We can see the storm approaching. And now I'd say the storm is here. So it is persecution light. Make no bones about it. It's still persecution light. But people need to wake up, because we are the frog in the kettle. And if you just follow the trajectory, we need to do something. And I think we need to overturn the tables would be one way to say it. Look at what Jesus did. We are, to the core, we are love our enemies. We are to not hate. But look, we are in a democracy, and we need to raise our voice. We need to shout, and we need to cry foul when a foul is being perpetrated against us. And it absolutely is.
So absolutely. And I think that is one of the reasons why so many people have been sounding the alarm in America. And, like so many other things, people will dismiss things until they become a very real big problem. And you want to prevent it. You want to stop it from getting to that place. But when it comes to your report, the Persecutors of the Year report, let's talk about that, because a lot is in that report. What were some of the most alarming findings, or you've been doing this a long time, the findings that most stood out to you?
Well, for me, I always go back to Nigeria. Most Americans have no idea what's going on in Nigeria. But imagine this, for the last 20 years, probably up to about 100,000 Christians have been murdered. 3.5 million Christians, their lands have been taken from them. And the government's pretty much done nothing. And so to bring this home, I'd say let's scale this up to the United States numbers. So in the last 20 years, 400,000 Christians murdered. And then let's say 14 million Christians have lost their homes. And the government can never seem to do anything about it. And so this is where I'm very impolitic and I speak the truth. And I'm trying to, for a decade now, I've been trying to wake Washington. And a lot of people have come to see this. But the reason hardly anything happens in Nigeria is this, and that's because the radical Islamists, they are embedded in the government, and the Fulanis, they own the organs of state, all the security organs, so the army, the intelligence agency, the police. So strangely, nothing happens. They come to Washington, they say, gosh, this is one tough problem, but these are guerrilla fighters, we're trying. Please give us more money and arms and maybe we can do something. And I'm like, that doesn't fly. And, if just open your eyes and look at the situation. So that's Nigeria.
Let's talk about the Fulani herdsmen for a minute, because a lot of people don't know who they are. People might know who ISIS is. They've heard the other terror groups, but this is the group we are seeing again and again as being the perpetrator of late of many of these atrocities against Christians. Can you tell us a little bit about who they are?
Yeah. And the only thing, Billy, I'd say I'd kind of pull back farther and say it's not so much the herdsman. The traditional Fulani herdsman is not really the enemy. The Fulanis are herders of cows and the Christians are farmers. And so, look, for hundreds of years, there was a problem because the herdsmen, the cows would come in and eat Christian crops. That's a normal thing. And so there was small conflict, but they always had a way to work it out. And it's like, we damaged your property. Hey, what can we do to fix this? And the Christians and the Muslim Fulanis always got along. But now, look, the Islamists have come in. So starting 20 years ago, they were armed and a lot of foreign fighters coming in that are Fulanis, but the Fulanis are beyond Nigeria. They're coming in and they attack, they pillage, they murder, they pull out the machetes, they burn. And this is the 3.5 million Christians uprooted from their farms, 100,000 killed. And you have to look at, again, pull back. What do you see? This is a massive land grab. This is a slow-moving genocide. This is an Islamic jihad where the government is in cahoots with these guys. The Fulanis are always the smartest guys in the room. They have been for hundreds of years, and they're operating behind the scene. They are radical Islamists, but that's the hidden hand that's allowing this to go on and on.
It's really a strange situation for outsiders looking in, and you can fill in the blanks here, but Nigeria it's not a country where only 2% of the population is Christian. You have a ton of Christians there. In fact, I believe the percentage, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is well over 40% or so. I mean, when you see these estimates, how is it, and maybe you just said it with the government, that you have a situation where that many people are in a country and yet you have this level of persecution against them?
Yeah, it is a bit of a mind bender. And so you could almost say it's just let's just say it's 50-50 Muslim Christian. And again, very simplistic. It was Muslims in the north and Christians in the south. But what you've seen over the last 10 years, 20 years is the Christians have been driven out of the north. Well, now the battle has come to the middle of the country that was largely Christian. And now they're being pushed in the massive land grab. They're being pushed out. So there's no Christian voters. The land's being taken over by the Fulani, who own cows, and now the attacks are going south. The Fulanis, if you go back in history, look, they were set up by the Brits, and the Brits relied on them. Again, smartest guys, smartest tribe in the room, smartest guys in the room. So the Brits always relied on them when they were a colony, and they were left, and they can run circles around the Christians. And the Christians really haven't raised the alarm bell, Billy, because many of them live in the South and they don't feel it. So those in the middle know the pain. But that's kind of the backstory. Again, it's the hidden hand in the government controlling the organs of state that are involved in security. So nothing ever gets fixed. And
I mean, we saw in May of 2022, there was a Christian college student who was stoned. And that story seemed to me to break the Nigeria story out into the world. People were starting to talk about it who normally wouldn't. And it's not unfortunately a story you hear very often, but that was so shocking. I mean, what can you tell us about the numbers of atrocities against Christians? We keep seeing these reports. How common is it? Is it daily that we are seeing people being abducted and killed in Nigeria?
Yeah, I think that's a fair one. If you just want to average it out, you could say it's daily. On any given week, any given day, you're going to see attacks. Again, when you're talking about 3.5 2.5 million farmer families lost. That's a massive number. That's just over 20 years. So you average that out, it's going on constantly. But to the point where the individual attacks against any village, they're not even news making, right? Because you have to have something that stands out from the rest to really make news. Going on all the time. Again, the government comes to Washington every time. Gosh, this is such a pernicious problem. We're doing our best, but yeah. Give us more money, give us more arms, and we'll go after these guys.
One of the other things about Nigeria that I did want to talk about, the countries of particular concern list and the State Department and the putting of Nigeria on that list, the then removal of Nigeria and the pressure that many have put back on the U.S. government to put Nigeria back on that list. What is going on there?
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it involves there's probably a couple angles, but the simple story is it involves 3 letters, and it's OIL. So Nigeria has oil, right? And is the biggest, most probably important country in Africa. So if religious freedom was the only prism we looked at Africa through, this country would be dealt with. But because of their strategic importance, because of the fact that they are an oil-producing nation, they've gotten away with a lot. And so we've let them off the hook over and over.
And then, before we go, I do want to also talk about Azerbaijan and what we've seen happen with Nagorno-Karabakh. And I mean, there's so much going on there. We've covered that quite a bit at CBN. But tell us a little bit about their placement in this report.
Yeah. Well, and Billy, you're going to relate to this one, but this is a tough situation because almost no American can point to where either Armenia or Azerbaijan is, right? And I'd be hard pressed. So I feel that. And so I simplify this. So basically, look, Turkey went in. Turkey is like the most important nation in Central Asia. They are now ruled by a radical Islamist, and that's Erdogan. And this guy has very big ambitions. He's very radical. He came in sheep's clothing, but he is working through Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a proxy. They're his puppet. He took the leash off them. The Armenians were attacked by Turkey early in the last century. More than 1 million killed in a massive jihad. So this is part 2. So Armenia is a Christian nation, and a little part of their country was in debate over who owned it with Azerbaijan, and Turkey again let their guard dog off and took the land back. The Russians previously had it, and they got taken up with Ukraine, and so couldn't protect anymore.
Yeah, it's such a heartbreaking situation, and there's a lot of speculation about where it could go next. I won't go there right now in this interview, but I would love to have you back again to talk more about this. Final question for you: when it comes to the Persecutor of the Year report, what are you hoping to accomplish? What is the end goal of that work?
Well, we're just trying to, for one, wake up the church. Persecution is a very tough thing. So there's, you see a lot of horror when you have to deal with this ministry, and it's complicated. You think about the issues we discussed today. So what we do is we want to produce a primer, and that is just a teaching aid. And that's for people on the Hill. That's for the media, so they can, get hold of a very complex situation. And we're doing this really day to day with persecution.org. We're putting out news all the time, every day. So to wake especially the church, but even to go beyond that and to get into secular media to say, guys, this is so unjust. Look what's going on.
Well, I want to thank you for the time coming on today, breaking this all down for us. And we're looking forward to having you back sometime soon. I know unfortunately, there's no shortage of this, information and persecution to talk about. And we appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.